Yesu Kristo ni mfalme na ni mfalme wa wafalme, ni Bwana wa mabwana, utawala wake si wa dunia hii imani, utawala wake si wa mbinguni, utawala wake si wa dunia hii imani, utawala wake si wa mbinguni. We thank God for our choir because the song they have just sung is actually the summary of what we celebrate today. Wer majo kwayo werono en injili e yo machuok mangisowa kuku kod thor mar nyasi ma kawuono. It defines the crux of the Kingship of Christ that we celebrate today. That Jesus is the King, but He is not King like other kings. He is the King of glory. He is the King of our stories. Jesus en Ruoth, to ken Ruoth kaka ruodhi moko. Loch ne opogore gi loch mag ruodhi mag piny ni. Loch ne en loch man gi ngima, loch ne en loch man gi teko, loch ne en loch man gi duong'. Sometimes, when I walk up the mountain, as most of you know, I talk to God. You know, it's sometimes just good to talk to God without praying. You just discuss with God issues about your life. And yesterday, when I was making a walk, I asked God a very simple question. What do you want the people to hear on the solemnity of Christ the King? And by a way of inspiration, I actually received an answer. God told me to talk about three things in our lives. To talk about the parables in our lives, to talk about the promise of God in our lives, and to talk about the paradise that Christ is offering each and every one of us. And as I was trying to reflect and joke around with words, I wrote the following things in my mind, which I later came and wrote, that every parable is a promise of paradise. And every promise is a parable of a paradise. And every paradise is a parable of the promise. It may look very complex, but Father Felix is saying a very simple thing, that God speaks to us in parables, and each and every one of us is a parable and an outcome of a parable. And when we reflect today on Christ the King, we are seeing the parable of the cross, defining Jesus as King. The cross becomes his throne, and thorns become his crown. It is not all about Jesus, it is more about ourselves. Because each and every one of us here present, and everybody in life, has a cross they must carry, whether they like it or not. And each and every one of us, once in a lifetime, we have thorns that prick our lives, whether we like it or not. But Jesus on the cross becomes the King of the parables of our lives, to tell each and every one of us that God concludes human parables with miracles and paradise. Nyasaye tieko weche mane ngima dhano gi duongne maler. We may pass through many ways, we may experience so many things in our lives, but one thing that is very sure in our lives is the promise of paradise. Watieko maber, kata ok wachako maber. Nyasaye tieko kodwa maber, kata ok wadhi maber. Nyasaye loso gik moko mabeyo, kata gisekethore. That is why the first reading is an inspiration to each and every one of us to allow Jesus to be the King of our lives, and to manage our issues and to manage our affairs. We are seeing in the first reading, the whole house of Israel has come together to anoint David. At this time, just in summary, things were not doing well. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of fear from the Philistines, and Israel as a country was threatened. But the elders discovered, when we place David on the throne, the anointed one of God, things will be fine. That is a call to each and every one of us to enthrone Jesus in chaos of our lives, to enthrone Jesus in the plans of our lives, to enthrone Jesus in our lives every day, irrespective of what life brings to us. Why? One, without Jesus, life is chaotic, however good it looks. Without Jesus, life is a threat of losing itself, however stable it is. But with Jesus, everything begins to work, everything begins to rise. That is why God is calling upon us that for things to work and rise, Christ must take his throne in our lives. Mondo gik moko timre, mondo gik mopodho chungi, Jesus nyaka bet ruoth mar ngimawa. To mondo Jesus obed ruoth mar ngimawa, for Jesus to be the King of our lives, the first thing we need to do is to change our attitude. We are seeing two people with the same circumstance, but different results completely. The two thieves who are crucified with Jesus, one of them has despaired. He is actually insulting Jesus. One of them became so smart that he even stole heaven just by his confession. Me and you, our circumstances are not very important. Our attitude and our dispositions are more important. Because life begins and ends with our attitude and our disposition. Gimatimore ngimawa ok duong, paro ma wan go duong moloyo. That is why today, Jesus on the cross, Jesus who is King, is calling upon each and every one of us to embrace our life with Christ-like attitude. Kao ngimawa gi paro mar Kristus. Wane tem, wabedo gi paro mar Kristus. Wane mor, wabedo gi paro mar Kristus. Watimo maber, wabedo gi paro mar Kristus. Ok watimo maber, wabedo gi paro mar Kristus. Seche moko kago mbaka gi ji, tangiso ji ni ok ber, ja Kristus nyaka par kaka ja Kristus, kiki par kaka jaluo. I always tell people it is okay to live like a Luo, but it is not very good to think like a Luo. You know, there is what is called metaphysical absurdity, that all people have a problem describing things that are abundant. Manemo miyo jaluo paro, kineno pach jaluo, jaluo ko hero nyako, to hero nyako no deadly. You know, love and deadly cannot go together. Nyasaye ber. Joma no her deadly erong'ia kai. Jaluo ka gimoro berne, to gino ber marach. To ka gino mit, to mit marach. Nyasaye ber. To ka jaluo dhi kamoro oneno ji mang'eny, koro wiye wil gi jomo neno mana dhano. Owacho mana ni, macha dhano man ka ng'ane. To kodhi kama mtokni ng'eny, to oneno ang'oa? Oneno ang'oa? Oneno matoka donge? Koro moko go okone. To ka en ng'ama nigi pesa, koro okone pesa, oneno mana otonglo. Iwacho ni ng'ane nigo otonglo. In other words, it is a shrinking thought, and we cannot handle our life with that shrinking thought. Ok wanyal kao ngimawa gi paro maduoko wa chien. To paro ma ok nyal duoko wa chien en mana paro achiel kende. Paro ma Jesus nyisowa e msalaba. Christ-like attitude that he exhibits on the cross is the only attitude that gives us the grace to fight and overcome the challenges of our lives. And today, God is telling us, change your attitude and start the fight. God will be glorified in the fight. Change your attitude and start doing things. God will be glorified, even at home. Because when we look at Jesus, the attitude of Jesus on the cross gives us three things. It gives us faith. Jesus suffers, but he suffers in faith. It gives us hope. Jesus suffers, but he suffers in hope. It gives us love. Jesus is dying, but he is dying because of love. I want to say without any fear of contradiction that we cannot live our life without these three things. Life without faith is dead. However much we achieve, if we don't have faith, we are dead. Life without hope is finished and meaningless. However much we achieve, it is still meaningless. Life without love is useless and painful. However much we say very big words. That's why today the world is suffering from three sicknesses. The first sickness is called faithlessness. The attempt to think that we can live without faith and God. And what is happening? Things are falling apart. The second thing is hopelessness. People are losing hope. Even what people used to do, these days they can't do well because they are losing hope. And also lovelessness. Love has gone into the wallet. And so you are as handsome as your wallet. That's why I think it's a very sad thing as a man to work on your facial, sijui looks. Ladies don't care about looks. They look at the wallet, sivyo. And that's why the world has become very hopeless. And it is actually catching up with us. Sometimes when I talk to young people, I talk to them about family. And I always say, and I tell them, even last Sunday I did, kain ngawui, kise chopo igni prario gabich, nyaki par ngima mar kend. To kichopo igni prario go chiko, ter Samaria pagaboro, nekech ise wuodho. Nyasaye ber. To kain nyak also think like that. But sometimes when I talk, you can't blame Nyam Kiko. There is a lot of hopelessness. There is a lot of hopelessness. But I always say, it is also good to marry when you are not so independent. Then you learn to appreciate your spouse as a gift to yourself. But if you marry when you are very independent, your spouse comes as a problem in your life. Kikendo kise tegno ing'iyo timo gigi kendi, to chako ngima gi dhao. Nikech seche moko min nyithindo bende dwaro nong'isre kaka ong'e chiedo, kaka mama gi nopuonje chiedo. Koro in idhi tich kiduogo, tiyudo kochielo tong' 4. Kar mondo i-congratulate, ichako gi warning. Odni ok tede tong' 4. Iwinjo mano nyako? You begin with quarreling. Then what happens? You know, marriage has 3 important phases. There is what is called the honeymoon phase. In the honeymoon phase, there is nothing wrong. Even wrong things are very good. Tell a young girl who is seriously in love or madly in love that you see your husband is limping a bit. You will say, kamane kaka ninja masani wuotho. Don't joke with me. Tell a young boy who is in love that, you know, we are looking at your wife, but I think this girl you want to marry, things are not coordinating. He will tell you, no, she is only confused. I have confused him. Because if you don't know in marriage, you either convince your spouse, but if you can't convince him, confuse him. God is good. Then the valley of real life. That is called the conflict and compromise zone. That is the time you are understanding one another. Ugoru to thee. Ugoru to thee. There is nothing right, there is nothing wrong. Kuse goru makoruol. Then you start now climbing the mountain of life. You are very stable. Katugi ke peak. Peak and such a makoro churi yoko badi. Ochiemo kochiemo, ngato ka ngato nigi dhoge. Nyasaye ber. Min nyithindo ok obadhi, otuo ok otuo, ng'ato ka ng'ato nigi nyasache. Pesa, to ng'ato ka ng'ato ok nigi pesa ne, pesa to marute. We must pray today as we celebrate Christ the King that God renews our faith. God renews our hope, and God renews our sense of love for Him, for one another, and the love of life for ourselves. Otherwise, we are slowly diminishing or being destroyed by the many philosophies of the world. The second thing that God is telling us today, that we have to participate in our own salvation history. Salvation depends on our participation. And don't be a spectator in your life. Be an actor. Do something, however small it is. It may mean something for God. Because we are seeing around the cross many spectators. Many spectators. But we are seeing one person who acts justly. That is the good thief. Today we must ask ourselves, are we spectators in life or we are actors? Because faith without action is dead. And that's why we are also seeing something unique in David. You know, if you never knew the story of David, Goliath, that we call Goliath, would stand up in the morning and insult the Israelites the whole day. But one day there is a shepherd boy who said, no, this thing must stop. This thing must stop. And what does he do? He steps out of comfort zone. He picks his 5 stones. God uses 1 stone to grant him victory. I believe in life there are also things that sometimes insult us. Seche moko ntiere gik mayanyo ngimawa. Seche moko isetiyo matek, to koro tuo biro, koro dwa miyi dago ngima mane ok ipar. Seche moko you are a very organized person, But you wake up, you are jobless. Now you want to live a life you never imagined. Sometimes it's just the children. You have worked well as a parent, but when you hear the stories of your children, you want to commit suicide. Sometimes it's just your spouse. Kiwinjo gik miwacho kuom min nyithindo e radio matiyo gi kuon gomena mang'ich e kor gweng'. You get shy. Sometimes it's your husband. Either omadho kong'o, kata kong'o madhe, kata gimadhore. God is telling us today to arise and confront with faith and hope anything that is insulting our lives. Jesus is not paying attention to insults on the cross. He is paying attention to the Father, and that makes him king. And St. Paul is telling us in the second reading, all of us has been qualified to receive the grace of God. All of us have been qualified for the kingdom of God. But how does God qualify us? God qualifies us in our daily experience. What we experience at the moment is how God is qualifying us. Somebody somewhere is being qualified by failure. Another person somewhere is being qualified by challenges. Another one is being qualified by stress. Somebody else is being qualified. But when we allow Christ to be all in all and to take charge of our lives, we receive the blessings and the grace of God. Finally, today, for Jesus to be our King, we must surrender to God. For Jesus to be our King, we must surrender our lives to God in prayer. Jesus surrenders to the Father, and the Father anoints him there and there, the King of the universe. A king of a parable, because he is not living in the house of kings, but is reigning on the cross. He is not sitting on those affluent thrones, but is standing on the cross. And this reminds me of something I used to do when I was a child. I remember when I was about 3 years, in the house of my grandmother, there were 3 things. There was a wooden carved statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. There was a cross in the middle, and the portrait of Pope John Paul II, who was the Pope by then. And as a child, this is what I believed, that Jesus is not sleeping on the cross. Why? Because that cross was very luminous. If you go to bed, immediately that time there were not lights. It was just koroboi. Kuda koroboi. Then you see it shining. I have grown up. I am a priest. But I still believe Jesus is not sleeping on the cross. Yesu ok nind e msalaba. En ruoth matiyo. Totiyo mana ka wachiwo ngimawa. Otiyo mana ka wayiene mondo oti. Otiyo ka wamiye gigo mane ngimawa. Kawuono penjri e misani, en ang'o midwa miyo Nyasaye mondo timni? What is it that you want to offer Jesus, who is not sleeping on the cross? He is saving the world on the cross. May God give us the grace to offer to Jesus our lives. And may Christ, who is the King of the glory of our lives, strengthen each and every one of us, not to live according to the logic of the world, but to live according to divine logic. What is divine logic? Everything we undergo brings the presence of God in our lives. Our past is not as important when we make a decision. Our destiny changes when we accept Jesus. The logic of God is, whether we have failed, whether we have experienced messes, whether we have experienced what in our lives, God reigns on the cross and makes everything beautiful. When I was in first Mass, as I conclude, I remember 2 songs we used to sing during the BBC. You know, those days, choirs were only focused on the liturgy. And one of the things that used to happen, people are doing what? People are singing. And I remember 2 songs we used to sing. One of them was in French. And in French we used to sing, Ni marin giloch giteko giduong, Ni marin giloch giteko giduong, Mosiko. Where is French? Ni marin giloch giteko giduong, Ni marin giloch giteko giduong, Mosiko. Nyasaye nigi teko mar timo gik matek, wamiye thuolo mondo obed ruoth. Nyasaye nigi loch, to loch ma en go en loch mapudho loch ma jachien otwewa. Ingeni seche moko watemo ndi titweri e loch, idundori mana kama intiere. Ingeni dhiang' motwe loch kama intiere modundore. Wan bende seche moko yudo mani family dundore adunda. Nyako dhi katedo, isechako ikori kaka in nyawana, kinyo duogo. Seche moko tedo western, ichako puonjori Kiswahili, nyikwa ipuonji Kiswahili, kaki dhi moso maro. Ming'e Kiswahili ni oduogo en kanyo. Nyithindo yudo tich, to kaka gichamo msara mokwongo ne kaka giduogo dala, loch moro ni kanyo. Uwinjoru kaka baba gi mama muchak muwach ni wan chenro wa en kama kama, ka wayudo pesa wadwa timo achiel ariyo adek, chieng' ma pesa biro, chieng' ne mudawe, gik moko koro ok timre. Dhano ni e loch, to loch ma dhano nitiere, Nyasaye ema nyalo tieko. Loch ipudho gi loch, to loch e gima wayudo kawuono e sawo mar Kristus Ruoth. Christ must reign in our lives and untie our lives. The second song we used to sing, and we want to sing it as we conclude. Ufalme na nguvu, utukufu vyote vyako Baba. Jina lako Baba, litukuzwe, utawale petu milele yote. Jina lako Baba, litukuzwe, utawale petu milele yote. Ufalme na nguvu, utukufu vyote vyako Baba. Jina lako Baba, Baba, utawale petu milele yote. Jina lako Baba, lituku, Baba, utawale petu milele yote. Kristo mfalme atawale. May Christ the King reign. Jesus mangi loch opudh loch. Mano esao mar Kristus Ruoth. Nyasaye otawala. Nyasaye obede ngimawa kendo ritwa. Wachung'uru malo kendo wahulu yiewa.